The envelope felt heavy in my hands as I sat alone in Uncle John's study, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The rest of the family was still downstairs, picking over funeral refreshments and discussing the estate like vultures circling their prey. But I couldn't join them, not with Uncle John's last words echoing in my mind. "Wait until after the funeral, Elizabeth," he'd said during my last visit, pressing the sealed envelope into my hands with trembling fingers. "Promise me you'll wait." His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, had been serious, almost desperate. I promised, of course. Uncle John had always been different from the rest of the Blackwoods. Warmer, kinder, less obsessed with maintaining the family's pristine image. While my father and his other siblings chased social status and wealth, Uncle John had been the one to attend my school plays, to ask about my dreams, to treat me like a person rather than another piece in the family's grand chess game. Now, 3 days after watching his casket lower into the ground, I finally broke the seal. My name is Elizabeth Blackwood, and until that moment, I thought I understood my family. The Blackwoods were old money, with roots tracing back to the early days of Boston society. Our family's investment firm, Blackwood Capital, managed billions in assets. We lived in mansions, attended elite schools, and moved in circles where last names carried more weight than bank accounts. But as I unfolded Uncle John's letter, everything I thought I knew began to unravel. "My dearest Elizabeth," the letter began, his familiar scrawl bringing tears to my eyes. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time for you to know the truth about our family's fortune, about how the Blackwoods really came into their wealth." I paused, my heart pounding. Through the study's open window, I could hear my relatives' voices drifting up from the garden. My father, William Blackwood Jr., was probably holding court as the new head of the family, already planning how to divide Uncle John's considerable estate. "The story we've always told," the letter continued, "about your great-grandfather building Blackwood Capital from nothing, about his financial genius and impeccable timing. It's all a lie. The truth is darker, and it starts with a man named James Sullivan and a theft that changed everything." My hands trembled as I read on. According to Uncle John, in 1963, my great-grandfather, William Blackwood Sr., had been a struggling stockbroker, desperately trying to keep his small firm afloat. James Sullivan had been his client, an immigrant who'd spent 30 years building a successful import-export business. "Sullivan trusted your great-grandfather," Uncle John wrote. "He'd entrusted him with his life savings, millions in today's money. But William Sr. saw an opportunity, one that would either make him or break him forever." The letter detailed how William Sr. had systematically stolen Sullivan's money through a series of fraudulent investments and hidden accounts. When Sullivan discovered the theft, he confronted William Sr., threatening to go to the authorities. "What happened next," Uncle John's letter said, "is something I only discovered years later, after your grandfather, my father, had too much to drink one night. Sullivan didn't just disappear, as the papers reported. He was found, badly beaten, near the docks. He survived but was told in no uncertain terms that if he went to the police, his family would suffer the same fate." I felt sick. James Sullivan had been forced to flee Boston, leaving behind everything he built. William Sr. had used the stolen money to expand his firm, laying the foundation for what would become Blackwood Capital. The theft wasn't just about money, Uncle John explained. Sullivan had documents, contracts with overseas suppliers that were decades ahead of their time. Your great-grandfather stole those too, used Sullivan's connections to build our family's international presence. Everything we have, the firm, the properties, our place in society. It all came from what was stolen from James Sullivan. My hands shook as I reached the next part of the letter. I've spent years tracking down the truth, gathering evidence. It's all in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped to the back of this letter, but there's more, Elizabeth. James Sullivan had a grandson. His name is Michael Carter, and he's been trying to uncover the truth about his family's lost fortune for years. I touched the small key taped to the letter's final page. Below it, Uncle John had written an email address and phone number. Michael Carter's contact information. "I'm trusting you with this, Elizabeth, because you're different from the rest. You have your mother's heart and your grandmother's spine. You'll know what to do with the truth." The letter ended with detailed instructions about the safety deposit box and a final note. "Whatever you decide, remember that the truth has a way of coming out. Better it come from someone with conscience than someone seeking revenge. I sat there for a long time, the letter heavy in my lap, the key cold against my palm. Outside, I could hear my father's laugh, confident and commanding. He'd always told me that our family's success came from making bold decisions. I wondered if he knew just how bold his grandfather's decisions had been. The next morning, I arrived at First National Bank as soon as it opened. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Uncle John had promised. Decades of evidence meticulously gathered and organized. Bank statements showing the original transfers of Sullivan's money. Correspondence between William Sr. and various associates discussing how to handle the Sullivan situation. Newspaper clippings about Sullivan's disappearance and the mysterious expansion of Blackwood Capital. Most damning of all were the original contracts and business documents stolen from Sullivan, their yellowed pages still bearing his signature. Uncle John had even included a modern valuation of what Sullivan's stolen assets would be worth today, over $3 billion. I spent hours in the bank's private viewing room, going through everything. Each document, each piece of evidence, felt like another crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed about my family. The wealth we flaunted, the superiority we claimed, the legacy we protected, it was all built on a crime. That evening, as I drove back to my apartment, my phone buzzed with messages from my father. The family was gathering for dinner to discuss Uncle John's estate. My presence was expected. I almost laughed. They were all so concerned about Uncle John's millions, not knowing that he'd left behind something far more valuable and far more dangerous than money. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I pulled into my parking garage and took out my phone, staring at the contact information for Michael Carter. One call could change everything. One email could start the process of exposing decades of lies. But first, I had a family dinner to attend. One last chance to see them all together, confident in their position, secure in their lies, before I decided whether to tear it all down. As I changed for dinner, I thought about Uncle John's words. You'll know what to do with the truth. The problem was, I wasn't sure I did know. The truth could destroy my family, but keeping it hidden meant being complicit in a crime that had ruined another family's legacy. The sun was setting as I drove to my parents' mansion in Beacon Hill, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The same streets where, decades ago, James Sullivan had built his business, trusted the wrong man, and lost everything. I parked behind my sister Margaret's Tesla and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same as always, another polished Blackwood ready for another family gathering. But inside, everything had changed. The truth about our family's wealth was burning a hole in my conscience. The next few hours would determine whether I let that fire spread or smothered it forever. The Blackwood family dinner was exactly what you'd expect. Crystal glasses catching a light from the antique chandelier, silver place settings that had graced this table for generations, and conversation as carefully polished as the mahogany beneath our elbows. My father sat at the head of the table, already comfortable in his new role as family patriarch. My sister Margaret was to his right, her husband Thomas hanging on every word. My brother William we called him Trip, lounged in his chair, barely concealing his boredom. My mother kept the wine flowing, smoothing over any awkward silences with practiced ease. Now about John's estate, my father began, setting down his fork. The preliminary numbers are quite promising. The old man was even more successful than we thought. I gripped my water glass tighter, thinking about the safety deposit box contents, if they only knew. Of course, my father continued, there are certain complications. John's will have some unusual provisions. Like what? Margaret asked, leaning forward. He left a significant portion to charity, my father said, his displeasure evident. And there are some questions about his overseas holdings. I couldn't help myself. Questions like what, Dad? He glanced at me, surprised by my interest. I usually stayed quiet during these financial discussions. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Just some old business arrangements that need sorting out. Old business arrangements, like stealing a man's life work and threatening him into silence. Actually, I said, setting down my glass, I think there's something we all need to discuss. The room fell silent. Even Trip looked up from his phone. Elizabeth, my mother said softly, a warning in her tone. I pulled Uncle John's letter from my bag. Did any of you ever hear of a man named James Sullivan? The reaction was subtle but immediate. My father's hand tightened around his wine glass. My mother's smile froze. Even Margaret, who hadn't been born when it happened, shifted uncomfortably. Where did you hear that name? My father asked, his voice carefully controlled. From Uncle John, I said, unfolding the letter. He left me something interesting to read after his funeral. What followed was chaos, but not the loud, dramatic kind. It was the quiet, deadly kind that wealthy families specialize in. My father's face went through a series of micro-expressions: shock, anger, calculation. My mother set down her wine glass with trembling fingers. Trip finally put his phone away. I read the letter aloud. All of it. The theft, the threats, the decades of lies. When I finished, the silence was deafening. That's ridiculous, Margaret finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Grandfather would never. I have proof. I cut her off. Bank records, correspondence, the original contracts stolen from Sullivan. Uncle John spent years gathering evidence. It's all very well documented. My father leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Where is this evidence? Safe, I replied, meeting his gaze. And before you ask, yes, I've made copies. He sat back, studying me like he'd never seen me before. Maybe he hadn't. I'd always been the quiet one, the compliant one, the one who didn't make waves. What do you want? He asked finally. The question surprised me. Want? I don't want anything, Dad. I want to do what's right. Right? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to destroy everything our family has built? Think about what you're doing, Elizabeth. This isn't just about money. This is about legacy, reputation, generations off. Lies, I finished for him. Generations of lies, built on something stolen from another family. We built this company, Tripp interjected. Whatever happened back then, Blackwood Capital is what it is today because of our family's hard work. Our family's hard work? I repeated. You mean like the trust fund you live off? The position on the board you never earned? That kind of hard work. His face reddened, but before he could respond, my mother spoke up. Elizabeth, darling, surely we can discuss this rationally. Whatever Uncle John told you, he was unwell in his final years. Perhaps. Stop, I said firmly. I've already spoken to Michael Carter. That silenced everyone. My father's face went pale. I had called Michael the morning after reading Uncle John's letter. He was a professor of economics at NYU, brilliant and determined. He'd spent years trying to uncover what happened to his grandfather's fortune, hitting wall after wall of Blackwood money and influence. He has a proposal, I continued, one that could make this right without destroying everything. My father's eyes narrowed. You had no right. I had every right, I shot back. Someone in his family needed to have a conscience. I pulled out another document, the proposal Michael and I had drafted with help from his lawyers. Blackwood Capital will create a new division, focused on immigrant and minority-owned businesses. It will be funded with $2 billion, managed independently, with Michael Carter as the chairman. The Sullivan Foundation, it'll be called. $2 billion. Margaret gasped. Less than what was stolen, adjusted for inflation, I said calmly. Plus, Michael gets a seat on the main board and a public acknowledgement of the truth. Carefully worded, of course, to minimize damage to the firm. Or what? My father asked, though I could tell from his tone that he already knew. Or everything comes out, every document, every piece of evidence, and believe me, the press would love this story. The prestigious Blackwood family, their fortune built on theft and threats. Imagine the headlines. The room fell silent again as they absorbed the implications. Our family's reputation, our standing in society, the carefully cultivated image of old money respectability, it would all crumble. You're bluffing, Tripp said, but weakly. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of my conversation with Michael. His voice filled the room, discussing details of his grandfather's business, specifics that matched perfectly with the stolen documents. Think about it, I said, stopping the recording. This isn't just about money. It's about doing the right thing. About making amends for a wrong that's poisoned this family for generations. My father stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the garden where generations of Blackwoods had played, grown up, lived their lives of privilege. When he turned back, he looked older somehow. $2 billion? He asked quietly. I nodded. And the board seat? Non-negotiable. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll need to call an emergency board meeting. Relief flooded through me. It wasn't a full victory. The Blackwoods would still be wealthy, still powerful. But it was something. A step toward justice, toward healing a wrong that had festered for decades. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, meetings, and carefully worded press releases. The announcement of the Sullivan Foundation was met with widespread praise, a prestigious investment firm taking concrete steps towards social responsibility and equity in finance. Michael Carter proved to be everything Uncle John had said: brilliant, principled, and more interested in creating positive change than in revenge. Under his leadership, the Sullivan Foundation began transforming lives, providing capital and opportunities to people who'd been shut out of traditional finance. My family adjusted, as wealthy families do. My father found ways to spin the story into positive PR. Margaret discovered a passion for social impact investing. Even Tripp started showing up to board meetings prepared. As for me, I joined the Sullivan Foundation's advisory board, working alongside Michael to ensure that some good could come from our family's dark past. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could truly make up for what was stolen from James Sullivan. But it was something. 1 year after that fateful family dinner, I visited Uncle John's grave. The autumn leaves were turning, creating a carpet of gold and red around his headstone. "You were right," I said softly, placing flowers by the granite marker. I didn't know what to do with the truth. I felt a presence behind me and turned to find Michael Carter standing there, holding his own flowers. "I come here sometimes," he said, placing his bouquet next to mine, to thank him for having the courage to finally tell the truth. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the leaves dance in the breeze. "You know," Michael said finally, "my grandfather used to say that money wasn't the most important inheritance he could leave us. It was integrity. The Blackwoods stole his money, but they couldn't steal that." I thought about my own inheritance, not the trust fund or the family name, but Uncle John's final gift, the chance to choose integrity over convenience, truth over lies. "Your grandfather was a wise man," I said. "So was your uncle," Michael replied. As we walked back to our cars, I thought about legacy. Not the kind measured in dollars or properties, but the kind measured in choices. The choice to face uncomfortable truths, to right old wrongs, to be better than those who came before us. The Sullivan Foundation continues to grow, funding dreams and building futures. The Blackwood name still carries weight in Boston society. But it's different now, associated with redemption rather than just privilege. And somewhere, I like to think, Uncle John is smiling, knowing that his last letter did exactly what he hoped it would. It gave truth a chance to heal what lies had broken. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or power or social standing. Sometimes it's the courage to look at a carefully constructed facade and decide that truth matters more than appearances. As for me, I've learned that real legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you choose to do with what you know.